Hello and welcome to the second edition of Between Theory and Praxis, a series of conversations with academics, scholars, vets, and activists who work on human-animal relations. We are the Indian Animal Studies Collective. I am Anu Pandey, and my co-host is Susan Harris. Our guests tonight are Shreya Paropkari from Humane Society International, Nita Paropkari, who is a volunteer with Cross Hyderabad, and we are waiting for Dr. Varshitha from Crown Vet Hyderabad to join. Originally, we were supposed to have Dr. Tapashri Barua from there, but because of a sudden work engagement that came up, she indicated that she would not be able to make it. We are going to be talking today about moral responsibility and multi-species justice in the context of road accidents that cause death or injury to street dogs and other animals on the streets. Before we start, I would like to mention that this conversation is going to last for an hour, and we will start taking questions and comments after the first half hour. So please unmute yourself after the first 30 minutes are up, raise a hand, or type your question in the chat box, whichever suits you. A very warm welcome to you, Shreya and Nita. Thank you for accepting our invitation. We are delighted to have this opportunity to discuss your work with you, and we hope that it will shed light upon a lot of issues and questions that we think about very often in our meetings here. I would like to start by asking Shreya about the provisions in Indian law that pertain to animal victims of hit and run or other types of road accidents. And Shreya, just for a little bit of perspective here, our poster girl this episode is a dog called Jugni, who was injured in a road accident late last year and broke a leg. And so we've been following what happened to her after that. That has kind of been the trigger for conversation today. And our first episode last week was about Rufus, a dog on the IIT Delhi campus who died a few days after he was run over by a car. So that's where our rumination thoughts on this have been coming from. But of course, Rufus and Jugni are just two examples of something that happens to a whole lot of dogs on Indian streets. I see that Dr. Harshita has also joined. Dr. Varshitha has also joined. Welcome, Dr. Varshitha, and thank you so much for stepping in when Dr. Tapashri couldn't make it. We really appreciate your taking the time.
Thanks, Anu. Thank you for inviting me to speak here. But as I do for all the questions that come to me about what the specific law for a certain circumstance is, my answer will be that it's not easy, not a simple answer, but it's also not a difficult thing to act on. There are many provisions. I think India is one of the few countries that recognizes the duty to be compassionate in its constitution. And it's one of the few countries that has a specific law, a special law that protects the welfare of animals. And other than the special law itself, the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act 1960, there are various provisions in different laws across the country. There could be central legislation like the Indian Penal Code. There are state legislation. Police acts are state subject, so each has its own police act. And various states in their police act also recognize animal cruelty as an offense. There are specific state legislation guidelines, policies that are made in different areas that could be applied depending on the circumstance. So I think when we say what law specifically would apply, for sure the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act will apply. But in seeing which law applies, it is really very subjective to the circumstance. What are the facts? How did a certain incident occur? For any issue to be a crime, to be recognized as an offense, the law requires not just the act to happen itself, but also for the intention to have committed that what will come to be crime if there is intention. So it's very important that we take those factors into consideration before determining what laws will be applicable. Luckily for us, there are a lot of credit courses across law universities, something that wasn't a reality when I was in law school. But now there are a lot of credit courses across the top law universities in the country, whether it's NALSA offering the postgraduate diploma in animal welfare laws, animal protection laws, or the MA program, or JNLU, the Jharkhand National Law University, the Kolkata University, the National Law School in Bangalore. All of these universities offer some form or the other of course that takes you through animal protection laws that are in force in this country. But again, a shorter answer to your question is there are various laws that are applicable. The law is amazing, as I think for a lot of us who are faced with these instances of cruelty on a daily basis, we might find it frustrating because there's no immediate relief that we can give to an animal in terms of justice. But there are, it's a matter of a point of reference. For us, it might be like the laws aren't good enough. What is with the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act? The penalty is 50 rupees and at the most, and this is not helpful. That is not helpful, and that becomes a roadblock for us to actually apply the law. We have to apply the law and see what happens. While the penalty is low in the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, because it's dated, it was made in 1960, 50 rupees meant something then. It doesn't mean much now. But it still involves the 50 rupees, not like a challan. It's not like you kill an animal and somebody gives you a challan and you pay 50 bucks and you walk. It involves a whole lot of legal procedure and investigation, going to court for probably years. And when you're sentenced, then it's a penalty that's paltry, but I think the entire procedure is punishment itself. So regardless of what laws are applicable, there could be more than the PC Act, depending on which state we're talking about. But it's definitely something that is applicable, and there is something that we can do about it, provided it was a crime, in that there was an intention to commit that cruelty or that hurt to the animal.
There are two things that I'd like to take up based on what you just said, Shreya, and then we'll move on to Dr. Varshitha, because I have a question for her as well. The first is that it's extremely heartening to note that laws pertaining to animals, to the prevention of cruelty to animals, for example, are finding takers in the law universities in the country. I am assuming that this is a fairly recent development. And are there many takers for this? Is this finally being taken seriously, in the sense that victimhood in that sense is not limited to humans anymore, but that the definition is being expanded, so to speak, to include other than human victims as well? Is this relatively new, is my first question. And secondly, is this gaining popularity?
I would say so, because my reference point is about 15 years ago. We assisted different agencies, whether the police or the forest department, and we rallied around for volunteers. And if we called about 50 people, 2 turned up. But now I'm mentoring this wonderful fellowship that People for Animals Uttarakhand conducts in partnership with various other organizations. And we are in our second cohort of building capacity of individuals across different regions in India. And we had, 50 applicants the first time around, more than 30 this time around. And yeah, it's recent with the law schools, but for universities in the League of the National Law Schools, recognizing this as a viable course is very heartening for me. And there are takers because the PG diploma is in its third year, and NALSAR also last year launched MA in animal protection laws, in addition to the PG diploma, which is now the advanced PG diploma. So yeah, it depends on where you're looking at it from and what your reference point is. So when we step out of our small circles, because we're all, again, it's the daily cruelty that we are constantly looking at. There's no time between each of our actions that we have to take, whether it's a rescue, running to the vet, is another animal that needs help, there's a dog that needs getting adopted. So between each of these things and each animal that we try to help, there's no time to take a pause and say, okay, this is going well. We continue to see what we usually see, and so we might miss those small victories that are building. So I think the moment definitely has come far, and I'm happy with the progression.
Does sound like something to rejoice about, absolutely, and it comes as a big surprise, a very welcome one for me. So thank you for sharing that with us. Just one more very quick question for you right now, again, a shoot off from what you said a little while ago, and that was the idea of cruelty. So cruelty and intention together, then, if I've understood correctly, lead to the PCA, for example, being applied in certain instances. But what about the cases in which there is no intention? I mean, cases which are really accidents that happen, not because the person driving is drunk or driving rashly or dislikes animals and decides to run over them or something. What about the cases where it is just an accident that happens, because accidents do happen? And I'm thinking of this again in comparison with what happens if a human on the streets is the victim of a hit and run or of an accident. Even if there is no culpability, even if there is no rash driving or driving under the influence of something or the other involved, a certain amount of responsibility does accrue to the person who was behind the wheel or riding the bike or whatever. And that process takes time. I mean, even if it is not a clear-cut case of negligence or criminal intent, a certain responsibility is pinned to the person who caused the accident knowingly or unknowingly. And that very often translates into, let's say, paying a certain compensation to those who are victims of accidents or their survivors. And that's what happens if it's human victims. Is there at all a recognition of the fact that even in accidents that are not caused knowingly or where there is no intent to hurt, a certain amount of responsibility should perhaps accrue to the person who caused the accident and favor the person here, a non-human person, who was the victim of it, in terms of rehabilitation, for example? Because we had the case of Rufus, who was the central figure for our first talk last week. And in the case of Rufus, the person who caused the accident refused to accept any responsibility, refused to be involved in his rehabilitation, in his treatment. She instead wanted him to be put down immediately. And quite besides the question of, is that what would have been best for Rufus under the circumstances or not, he was taken to a vet, he was under care, and he passed away a few days later because the treatments that were being tried did not work. His spine was broken, he was badly injured, and then various sort of infections and internal injuries emerged. But what about the dogs for whom there is hope of getting better or of attaining a certain quality of life with which they can go on? What about the people who refuse to be involved in that in terms of taking responsibility at all? Is there anything in the law to address this?
You're asking really weighted questions, but I'm happy to answer them. I mean, this is while law and social behavior is very deeply interlinked. Social behavior has, in some instances, motivated the development of a law, and vice versa. But what you're asking about is a social behavior, societal change issue, and less of a legal issue. For instance, to me, a dog is a goat, is a chicken, is a cow. They're all the same to me. Law currently focuses, and it's the focus of this panel as well, Jugni and others like dogs, companion animals, the ones that we relate to, the ones that we are close to. But the law wholly, and of course the society, completely ignore and neglect the most abused animals on the planet, and those are the animals that, in order of their worst suffering, are animals grown for the purpose of food, working animals, animals used for experimentation, so on and so forth. So the law completely, well, not completely, but the law does significantly ignore. So the question of personhood is quite tricky. While personhood is not recognized in India, there have been some steps towards protecting or looking at animals, at least the beginning of conversation, looking at animals for their own value and not for the value that they provide us, the human species. So I think that personhood is something that we come to in a phase-wise manner, and not something that we can expect to happen overnight. And that's why I was drawing the distinction between what becomes a crime and why intention is important. And it's the same. We forget because we deal exclusively, I'm assuming, but I'm assuming for the rest of us that we deal exclusively with animals. And so that's the instance that we're constantly faced with. When we go to the police station, the police is not taking the complaint, they're being difficult because it's just an animal. I am not happy to report that that's the case with most anything. It's not different. Sure, animals are shortchanged a little more than people are, but then so are people. In accident cases, if it was a person that had been injured, it really depends on how much resources that person has to make their claims, and not so much that they have a benefit because they're humans. And because animals can't go to court directly, they have no benefit. That's not the case. It's about who can represent and how well they can represent the victim, regardless of what species that victim is. And I mean, that's definitely the attitude we have when we're working systematic changes, because we can't have it any other way. But yeah, that's the longer answer. I don't want to take more time. I know you have other speakers. But to more direct point, who's to take responsibility? If we had to look at what the law says, there are, again, agencies and entities that have certain responsibilities in law to care for certain species of animals. The municipal bodies, the urban local bodies, the panchayats are responsible for dog population management, in that they have to make sure there's animal birth control, there's vaccination, so on and so forth. There's supposed to be an SPCA in every district in the country that's supposed to extend help for animals that are subject matters of cases where there's animal cruelty alleged. And otherwise, the government has veterinary hospitals, government veterinary hospitals in every district that's supposed to provide subsidized care to animals. So those systems exist, but I think, again, a lot of us, again, the constant cruelty that we face, we are in our close circles, so we don't leverage these tools because we don't see immediate gratification. We go to a veterinary hospital, government veterinary hospital, we don't think the standards are great. So we'd rather take our animals to private veterinary care. I'm a big believer in building capacity and not reinventing the wheel. So what we can do to improve the systems that exist, because the systems will remain, we won't. So it makes more sense to me to invest resources in building the existing system and making sure the system which will outlast us, there for the animals when we aren't around.
Thank you, Shreya. That gives us much to think about. I'd like to ask a question if Dr. Varshitha is there already. Dr. Varshitha, are you there?
Hello, hi. I'm so sorry. Just a bad network issue, and I just came back from work, so I'm so sorry.
No problem. Glad to have you here. I would
Thank
like
you.
to ask you because as a vet, you've been in practice, and I wonder how often do you come across instances of injured animals? And in our context, I'm imagining that it is largely mostly dogs from the street, possibly sometimes cats, but also other beings. And who are the people who typically bring them in? Do you sometimes find that people who were involved in the accident bring the injured animal to the clinic themselves? Or is it more likely to be others, maybe people passing by who find an injured animal somewhere and decide to be involved in their treatment and bring them for help?
Actually, it's basically a mix of both things. Majority of the cases where accidents happen and all that, it's mostly rescuers and people who are interested in the welfare and support activities that bring them to the clinic. Very rare incidences where the person who's caused the accident brings them to the clinic. That happens like really rare. So, and otherwise, it's a few people who have pets with them already and who actually genuinely want to help and something. Very few of them that can do that at times. This is the majority of the scenario that we see, but it's mostly rescuers that do that.
And what are the numbers like, just offhand? Is this something that you see on a fairly regular basis and a lot, or is this something that's, less likely to happen?
Uh, People definitely bring them initially, but when they understand what is the procedure involved, what is the support involved, the costs involved, a lot of people withdraw from that thing at that position of time, because not everybody is ready to take up that responsibility. And in many accident cases, most of the cases are like, it's not just going to get better with one day. They need constant support, constant treatment, follow-ups, monitoring. All this actually costs a lot also, and it requires a lot of patience and effort to deal with them also. So many people are not really up for it to take up that responsibility. So that's where most of them drop out. The very few who actually go forward and take the responsibility of the animal, the pet, and take it through.
And in your practice, Dr. Varshita, do you find that vets, including yourself as well as other vets that you've known, um, try to encourage people to see it through to the end? Is that something that works at all? Because I understand what you're talking about, having been involved in a few cases myself where, there was a puppy that was hit by a bus or something and the leg was broken. And
Yeah.
it meant surgery to fix the leg. And then that meant that the puppy had to be kept restrained and not allowed to move for a couple of months. And that obviously involves a certain degree of commitment from the part of the rescuer in that sense.
Exactly.
Do you, how do you see your role in the whole thing besides treating the animal, the injured animal? Do you and other vets try to encourage or sort of urge the person to sort of see the whole thing through to the end? Or if people drop out on the way because it's more than they can deal with or more than they want to deal with, or what happens then? Do they just stop?
So yeah, so usually whenever they come through, we definitely try to help them in whatever way we can, be it the cost or the support that we can provide, until and unless what limitations we have, at least through that we help them and we tell them that we can probably give it a try. If they're just not ready for it, if it's a financial thing, then we definitely give them advice of shelters and everything which can help them through, and government. But if that support is required, we have a couple of rescuers who have foster homes who usually try to connect them with them. And if it works out, it usually happens, but that happens very rarely actually. Not many people are up for it.
Thank you, Dr. Varshita. And I'd like to mention here also that when Jugni was injured and with a broken leg, she needed, because she developed an abscess on her leg and that needed to be drained and cleaned every day. And they had very kindly arranged for one of their paravets to go every day, because I had found a foster home since I live really far from the clinic. So it was becoming difficult to pick her up every day, take her there and then bring her back. So we found a foster home that is about 2 kilometers away from the clinic. And Dr. Varshitha and Dr. Tapashri had delegated one of the guys in the clinic to go every day and dress the wounds, and that was a really big help. So I do know that they help out in these ways as well. Susan,
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for that. But this is something great that you're doing from your side also. I really appreciate that. And I really hope there are more people who are coming up forward and taking care of whatever is required.
Yes, Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question for Dr. Varshitha, which is, when an injured dog, maybe a victim of an accident, is brought to the clinic, because you have years of experience as opposed to the person who's bringing the dog to the clinic, can you quickly assess the damage that's been caused to the animal, and does that change and how does that assessment impact your dealing with the animal? Would you suggest different courses of treatment depending on the extent of the damage?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it definitely depends upon whenever a pet who's been through a road accident is brought to the clinic, we definitely first assess, because most commonly what are seen are fractures and spine injuries, and they might be internal injuries where the animal might be bleeding out also. So we definitely do a full exam. We give them options. We give all the owners options of what can be done. And based on that, we talk to them. If they have any issues, we negotiate in ways that both of us can work around so that the pet can benefit from that.
And does the animal suffering itself have any impact on how you perceive things? For instance, in the clinics, I've noticed that some dogs will be howling loudly, whereas some dogs will just be too exhausted from the pain to be crying out loud. On a day-to-day basis, how do you react or respond to those differences?
It's like it definitely varies from pet to pet, but at times you have to take tough calls in certain situations. If the pet is responding to the treatment and all that, then we can just go forward with whatever's required. But then if they're not very cooperative enough, and we'll have to use some other techniques where we have to hold them and go forward with the treatment and everything. It obviously varies from pet to pet. It depends upon how much pain the pet is in and what will be the future outcomes, what will be the circumstances and consequences we have to deal with down the lane also.
Thank you, Dr. Varshitha. My next question is for Nita. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, Nita has been a volunteer with the Cross Hyderabad since really many years. I think I came across her in this capacity already like almost 10 years ago, but Nita, you've probably been working in the field in this capacity for much longer. And so I wanted to ask you, how often did you encounter instances of animals injured in hit and run accidents, in particular street animals? And what typically happens when someone reports such an incident? Like what does it set into motion? How do you go about things, or how does anybody go about things in such a case? And who takes the responsibility for the animal's treatment? I ask because also I find that, or in conversations with a lot of people, private individuals, I find them complaining sometimes that they came across an animal that was injured and they promptly called up a rescue organization or a shelter, and the person there told them, we do not have the capacity to take on another animal. And then they kind of blame these institutions, saying, I tried, but they didn't support me, so it's their fault, more or less. And I've also spoken to activists and volunteers who engage almost on a daily basis with animal rescue cases. And they represent the belief, the idea, which I also completely understand, that one's responsibility does not end in noticing an injured animal and then calling up a shelter and saying, come take care of this animal, my part's done. And this I find is like this uneasy thing that goes on all the time. People who kind of say, we want to help, but the NGOs and the institutions are not helping us. And the institutions who we also know have limited funds, also saying, no, that's not the extent of it. You can't just expect us to take in every single animal. If you take an interest, if you stop, then you have to be involved. What happens typically in such instances?
That's 4 questions. So I'll try to remember in the order asked. First thing is, as we all know, the traffic in Hyderabad and how people drive in Hyderabad. Encountering accident cases where strays are run over is super common. You get like a couple of cases every day just in like a section of the city. So it's not uncommon. It's something you see every day. A cat or a dog, the spine is broken, like Dr. Varshitha said, is one of the most common incidents. And it's not something easy for vets also to deal with, because not every vet clinic has a say X-ray or ultrasound or machines to give full care to the animals. So these incidents are not just very common, they're also very expensive to treat. And that's the unfortunate part of these incidents. People do call the shelters. There are shelters, rescue services in the city, but like Dr. Varshitha has said, and I think most vets agree, these are cases that special individual attention and do better in foster homes. So even if you call and the shelter agrees to take in on the animal, it's not I mean, you wouldn't like want to drop it there because it's not going to get better. So it's a very complex decision whether you want to foster the animal and you want to go to the private vet and get full tertiary care treatment for the animal or not. So it is difficult for volunteers like myself or anybody. When we started out like way back 15 years back in Hyderabad, traffic was less. There were many shelters. There was Blue Cross there, which stopped its rescue services. Now there was People for Animals, and things were going well until the city started expanding exponentially. And then more animals are coming in, more people are coming in, more incidents happening, and that's when volunteers are overwhelmed with rescuing, and that's when they started saying like, why don't you take it up, and like, we are done and we can't do anymore. So I think that's another factor that people are not looking into. So just calling a shelter and saying take the animal and not donating, that's another big obstacle in Hyderabad. People are not very generous with donations. It's something I have noticed as someone who's traveled a bit. I think Bangalore, Mumbai, people are happier to give, but in Hyderabad, not as much towards animals. The donations are not very generous and they're not very regular. So that stops shelters from giving as well full services that they are probably capable of. But we have vets like Dr. Tapashri, Animal Care Clinic, all of them always give discounts when we take rescue animals to them. They waive off doctors, the doctor fees, which they don't need to because they've paid for their education as well. So it's a complex decision. We face a lot of obstacles financially. We have to make a decision if we can take on the animal or if the vet suggests euthanasia and if we should agree with them, not agree with them, try something. Yeah, it's a difficult decision. And how we try to overcome it is with crowdfunding. We pay as much as we can from our own salaries. Otherwise, we ask our friends. We don't have ATG certificates as individual rescuers. So it's just networking and helping people help animals who later on in the later years, they try to fund any other rescues that we come across. So it's a very, let's say, shaky system that we currently have, where we don't have like a common income stream. We don't have funds for the shelters. So it's not a very good system for the animals.
I agree with you there. And I was wondering, because we've been talking about shelters or, other institutions where injured or sick animals are dropped off. Sometimes people donate when they drop the animal off or have the animal picked up for treatment with the understanding that once the animal is better, he or she will be brought back to where he or she was picked up from. But the other thing that happens is because most of the animals on the street, and again, I'm thinking of dogs, but this applies probably to other animals as well, they are not vaccinated. And I have also come across situations where puppies in particular, who are still young and susceptible to picking up diseases, end up in a shelter which, for obvious reasons, is crowded. And there are a lot of animals brought from various parts of the city living in close proximity during the course of their treatment. So that, let's say, maybe the broken leg is plastered and the animal is kept immobile for long enough to give the leg a chance to heal. But the puppy picks up parvo or something else and comes back and dies in a couple of days, and sort of spreads it to its other siblings as well. And that also makes me come back to the whole question of how do we understand justice and, more importantly, responsibility when we're thinking of animals on the street that are not owned by anybody. So can one really say that one's responsibility stops where one drops the animal off at a shelter saying they are the ones who know how to do this, they're the ones who are here to do this? I did my part, knowing that it's probably not going to end well for a lot of the animals that are dropped out of shelters in that sense. So how can one think of then the sort of responsibility that we have towards animals, regardless of whether we caused the injury or we just happen to witness the injury? Is it enough to really just step in and then step back and say, my job's done? And the second question that I have is for all three of you. How do you deal with what, for want of a better word, I would describe right now as fatigue? Because in your work, all three of you are exposed to injuries and suffering and pain on a daily basis. And a lot of the injuries are really terrible. I know a lot of these end with the dog or cat not recovering. And in fact, decisions of euthanasia have to be made. Or even if the dog eventually does recover, it's a long, painful process. How do you deal with it without breaking down, I would say? Because that's something that Susan and I have been talking about a lot. We were thinking about it in terms of the work of vets, because you're professionals, but at the same time, you're humans. And I wonder what that does to you and what sort of strategies do you develop to cope with it and to keep going on. And the same would apply to Nita, your job, and Shreya, your job, because you also encounter suffering and pain, often without a happy ending on a day-to-day basis.
I just want to address that what I do is in a volunteer capacity. It's never been a job. It's never been a paid service where you earn or you're paid for or you're paid back at least for the medical expenses incurred or the foster special food and therapies and stuff like that. So most of us who do this do it just for the selfish reason that we love animals and we enjoy watching them thrive. And maybe we just have a bit more of empathy than the rest of the people around us. And a way to build this up, like who's going to be responsible for the stray animal, we do have something that's been recognized in the recent past as the role of a community animal guardian. And there are, I think, some programs where people are like taught how to take care of their community animals, to vaccinate them, to socialize with them, to desensitize them to vehicles or people and stuff like that. So I think that's the first step in your community, in your neighborhood, that you can take to be responsible for the animals, at least around you. And if every community is stepping up to take care of the animals in their community, then the burden on shelters, on rescuers, on vets who have to offer discounts, all of that is significantly less. Yeah. And about fatigue, I think Dr. Varshitha and Shreya can say more. Of course, there's a lot of fatigue when you have to do constant. I mean, I work a full-time job, and when you have a foster, I'm sure you can relate that you can't sleep all night. You need to step in for vet visits after work, before work. You need to network and ask your friends and fellow volunteers to step in when you can't step in. So it's constant work day in and day out, and it only feels good when the animal is recovering and when you see results of your efforts. Otherwise, you feel defeated, and there are points of there was phase when I was doing a lot of rescues where I felt, oh, every animal I pick up is dying, so it kind of gets to you, and it's not your fault, but you're like, why is this happening? We are doing what we can, and they're still dying. So fatigue sets in, and I think over years it turns into trauma, like you're scared of all of this. But when you live in India, where you have a lot of community animals, this is inescapable.
Thank you, Nita. Dr. Varshitha, would you like to respond to my fatigue question?
Yeah, sure. So being a vet, definitely on a regular basis, we see so much suffering, so much pain, and it's very difficult for us because there are so many. As I already told you, we had a case today where the pet was having constant seizures and had to be on medications and monitoring. But the owner said they can't take care of the pet and everything. They just wanted to go ahead with putting down the pet because the pet was in a bad shape. And we knew probably there would have been something that could have been done if we had given time and everything. But that was the owner's call and we had to do it. And it was such a difficult decision to make. Things like that kind of move you a lot, and and in a long term this thing, they break you down. But I guess you'll have to just look at a better way where things get better. There are patients you treat who are better because you've just done something for them. They're yeah, I guess that's how it is. The good ones just get you through the bad ones, I guess.
Thank you. And Shreya.
Been very difficult questions. On the shelter bit, my 2 cents. It's like you said, understanding that shelters are overcrowded. But I think collectively, when we're thinking about this from a larger perspective, from the big picture, I think it is important to see what we can do to prevent animal cruelty. Like you said, people, there's a lot of accident cases, and people don't want to, like in Rufus's case, they refuse to do something. It's, I think, building that collective conscious of the society to not look at animals more than just objects that occupy the space, the same space that we do. I think that's a great starting point, and everything else is a daily battle. And people who care have always found ways to help. As for the fatigue question, my work is less with direct care in terms of rescues and fosters, and more with a lot of systematic things. So my focus is farmed animals, and it is very difficult, and I don't have one solution to what I do for fatigue. I think, but the thumb rule is to always ask for help when you need it. And I don't have a solution. There is fatigue, but I think it's important that we recognize our own capacity and how much we can do. And it's important that we ask for help when we need it.
Thank you. Tanu has a question. Tanu, would you like to go ahead?
Yes. Am I audible and visible? So, yeah, I was just wondering, and since I am doing my field work in terms of human-animal relationship only in one of the nomadic tribes of Jammu and Kashmir, so these tribes are also very connected with their animals, like sheep, goats, and everything. And like with the participants' discussions only, they told me clearly that whenever they go to a vet for any treatment or something that the pet might need, they are usually available. But whenever they approach a private clinic, the same person who's in the government clinic is there as a private vet, and he approached that pet or that animal in a very different condition, in a very like a very caring way that they have mentioned like always. So I was just wondering if treatment is restricted to certain sections of the society in case of animals? And, and is it just fixated to the certain individuals? If they have more money or if they have more approaches in the society, or we do have certain kinds of, these kinds of, uh, I would say, uh, as in that uh, approaches towards care with individuals also. But is it also available to animals? Is it also seen in the animal world where the care is just for the certain sections or of the animals that are like in close connection to us and not to everybody who live with them? Or like how do we approach different kind of animals who need treatment and not just to everyone? If I'm able to make my question clear.
I don't know who your question is directed towards, but I think you're asking that why is the level of care at a private clinic better than at government clinics, and how the vets are more comfortable touching the animals?
Yes, that is appropriately the first part that I'm asking. And the second part is how treatment is more fixated to certain sections of the people. Like, for instance, if one section of the people bring their pets to the veterinary clinic or maybe to the government hospitals, they're not being attended. Whereas if the other section of the people are bringing, it becomes more obvious to give them care, to give them treatment, and to attend them and seek more options in considering that the animal stays or the animal is alive in any condition.
I think at government vets, they don't have an obligation to customer service because it's subsidized treatment. But I think at veterinary private vet clinics, they have an obligatory, sense of customer service, and that's where you see the difference. And with regards to how they touch the animal or why don't, like, for us, it's animal lover or people who like animals, touching and cuddling is a way of expressing that we love them or we care for them. But I think for the vets, it's just anatomy. And why they don't touch is probably because they're overworked. I think it's just a personal perspective and personal behavior. I think it's not to do with sections of the society. I mean, that's my perspective on it. But we do, because as someone who has a lot of animals off the streets, we can't afford to go to private clinics all the time. And we do go to the super specialty hospital in our city, which is very well equipped. And when we go on a regular basis, even the vets start recognizing our work and recognizing us as individuals. And they start paying attention and helping us out with our rescues. So in the starting, yes, they would be like, okay, this is just another person who's come to drop off an animal and not take responsibility for it. But the care at both different sects of the clinics are similar for the animal. It's not from our perspective, that's the difference. I still think if I take so when I rescue an animal, I see what kind of care it needs. If it needs advanced care, definitely I will go to a private. If it's a hematoma and anti-rabies vaccine, I will just go to the government vet. So that's something I have learned from my experience, where to direct the animal to. But I have found pretty much good care at all hospitals, and every vet is different. So it's also the question of your faith and trust on how the vet works. Yeah.
I think that's a common thing across, like I was saying, when we go to police stations, we find resistance and all of that. And I think it's how well you equip yourself, how well you understand the tools that are there to help animals, whether it's agencies, entities, vets, whether it's law enforcement officers. It's how well you represent the animal. And for whomever you're asking a service of, to know that you understand what their duty is, what your duty is, what is due to the animal. So like Nita said, when going frequently and the vets recognize and they understand that you care and that you're listening and that you ask questions and that you are seeking and expect a certain degree of care, I think that's what makes a difference. But that rings true across whether it's animals, humans. It's just about how well you can represent and what you can ask. I think the second part of your question was very interesting. I was nodding vigorously because I think I misunderstood it, because it felt like something I usually say, that the treatment in different species of animals. I thought that's what you were asking. It's most definitely there. That's the obstacle to the movement really flourishing, is to recognize all animals that are sentient as deserving of compassion, deserving of their own rights. And that definitely is there, regardless of, I mean, it's within the movement. A lot of us see animals. For the longest time, when I started off as a volunteer, and until just 10 years ago, I did not think, and I was devastated to learn that there are billions of these other animals that I had not considered in my what I thought was a crusade to help animals. But I rectified that. So I think it's just about recognizing what your capacity is and how well you can represent animals.
Paulomi has typed in a question here. Is it possible to claim money from third-party motor insurance for the treatment of a non-human street accident victim?
No, it isn't. I'm just assuming. But no, it's not. Before the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act 1960, that there was a Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act 1890, which recognized cruelty only if it was committed in a public place. So if you beat an animal in view of others outside of the privacy of your home, only that amounted to cruelty. If you beat up your animal inside the confines of your home, that was not considered cruelty. And for the jurisprudence to grow from that to what the definition, what amounts to cruelty now is, I think, is a giant leap. So maybe someday in the future, when personhood may be granted to animals of some kind, maybe then, but not today. Animals today are still property under law. And so if it was your pet dog that was injured, there are some claims in law that you can make, not against a third-party insurer, but probably in consumer court, probably in a civil court, definitely in a criminal court, regardless of that, whether that animal is a pet or not, provided that there is intent. But no claims to a third-party motor insurance agency as of now, no. But thank you, that was an interesting question.
Thank you, Shreya. Something that you said right now also really resonates with me. The idea that there are billions of animals out there that we do not think of, or that we consider questions of cruelty or fair treatment or justice or compassion when thinking about dogs and cats, maybe, animals that are out there in the wild and which are majestic. And then at the same time, we go on and we place these awful glue strips to catch mice in our homes, and smash lizards because we don't like them, and various other kinds of things like that. And that has been something that we've kind of tried to address in some of our previous conversations in a table talk series, but I have the feeling that we need to come back to it at some point soon. Not necessarily in an academic context, but in a more praxis-oriented thing, because I think that's a distinction that one tends to make a lot, that there are certain animals that deserve, so to speak, our compassion and our care, and there are others that are to be exterminated by all kinds of means possible, and one does not take into consideration the fact that they are sentient beings as well. Susan, you had a question.
Yeah, I had a question for Nita. As somebody who also occasionally rescues or tries to help animals, I've often thought that having a lot of money would make so many things. So it would make many things far more easier than it is. So would you say that when we're talking about justice for animals, having a lot of money is an important component of getting justice for the animal? You know, even if you need to file a case, uh, or even if you need to get treatment, which is essentially what matters to the animal and the animal's well-being. Since money is such a big part, would that make a big component of what justice is? And my other question was something you said earlier, made an impression on me, which is that whenever you're helping an animal and the animal ends up dying, then it feels like you're just failing in everything you're doing. And so when there is a series of failures, how do you account for your responsibility in not having managed to help the animal? Lately, I've been thinking that there must be, if one was smarter, then maybe the animal could have lived or survived.
So I'll address the second one first. I mean, that I used to think like that before. It's just a sign of immaturity and not knowing better. Like everything I take to the vet is dying. But then I think it's better you have a talk with your vet and always understand the prognosis, whether it's positive or negative, and prepare your mind mentally for it. So I think the biggest help right now for most people who have done rescues in the past or currently doing rescues, I think about 70% of them are taking therapy and addressing these questions in therapy. So you're not only paying for rescues, you're also paying to rescue yourself. So financially, it's a huge thing to be involved with your community animals for sure. And that drives you, of course, to believe that you want to earn more just to do better for yourself and for the animals. I have studied finance, and I have always been of the approach that if that animal welfare does not pay money, and if I want to do welfare for animals and pay the vet bills, I need to earn more money. So I've never taken up animal welfare as a profession. But of course, my sister, who's a bit younger than me, not too young, too much younger, not a big age gap, but just 3 years, and she's earning better than me. So I think there's money in animal welfare as well. So coming to the justice point of view and fusing both the financial aspect and the aspect that whether you are responsible, whether you can better, is making smarter choices and being more aware. And I think very few people have the empathy and compassion. And if they make the smarter choices, it's good for them and for everybody else. I mean, every animal they come across, not everybody else. Yeah.
Yeah, 3 years is long. I think I'm on the other side where the grass is greener. And I think that's the difference in how, again, the movement has progressed. And looking at the trajectory, I'm hopeful that the movement will take farmed animals and other neglected animals into serious consideration. But yeah, it has changed. The Ahimsa Fellowship, for instance, gives great opportunities for all that pass through the program to be recruited by the leading organizations in this country. So there is a lot to do. I think every individual has capacity to help animals. And whether it costs or not, in some way or the other, you can help animals. The easiest way to help animals is to not eat them. And then we go from there. We can give time at shelters when we don't have the capacity to rescue. It's how much time you invest in it and what you choose to do with it. We have litigations for implementing laws that protect animals, for developing laws where there is lacuna. And everywhere we are represented by the best in that field, the best lawyers, the best experts. And it costs us not in money. It's the network that we build. everybody has a capacity. So you may know a fabulous lawyer. We're not asking them to give all of their time and fight every animal case that we bring to them, but maybe a day a week in a month. And that could be the same for anyone, no matter what professional background somebody's coming from. We can find a way for them to help animals. So I think if we really want to do something full time, we can do it such that it costs us nothing in terms of money, and still help a whole lot of animals.
Thank you so much, Dr. Varshitha, Shreya, Nita. This has been an absolutely fascinating and very, very helpful conversation. It'll help us to think ahead, consider more what we can do, what all of us collectively can do. And I'm really grateful. We are really grateful to all three of you for making the time and for agreeing to join us today. Thank you also to all those of you who have logged in to listen and pitched in with your questions and comments. It's been really very helpful. It gives me much to think about and tangible lines along which to think. So thank you so much. We will be continuing these conversations in our series called Between Theory and Praxis. Please keep watching the usual spaces for further announcements. I wish you all a good evening and see you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.